Valve Software! You know Valve, they made Portal 2, Left 4 Dead 2, Hat Simulator 2, Dota 2, Half-Life 2, 2-1, 2-2, and 2 Alex. And most recently, Deadlock. Not 2. Yet. But all those games, not to mention Steam and Valve itself, wouldn't be around if it wasn't for a very unique man. A man who lacks some basic numerical knowledge between 2 and 4.
Triple 3, as in you've killed 3 heroes.
I don't understand.
Yet is hailed by many as a genius. A man named Gabe Logan Newell. Gabe Newell has been in the industry for a while now, and he's been called many things. Game developer, tech mogul, multi-billionaire, part-time Ringo, handsome with a charming personality, and my personal favorite,
G-Fat.
But more than any of those, people usually just call him Gaben.
I can be reached at gaben@valvesoftware.com. Thanks, and have fun.
The basic knowledge most people have on Gaben is this, right? He's the Valve head honcho, he's a big fat guy, and he gives me big fat Steam sales. Well, first of all, not fat anymore. Way to go, Gaben. Looking good, my man. But secondly, although those other two things are true, they're not the whole picture. As I'm sure many of you did, I grew up playing Valve games. I would see memes of Gabe everywhere on the internet and had that same surface level knowledge. But recently, I started thinking, I want to know more. More than just the Gabe can't count to 3 jokes. I wanted to know, just who is Gaben? I seek to answer that question in this video as best as I can, because I've done a lot of reading, a lot of listening,
Can make leather out of
Absolutely true.
and a lot of watching interviews, and I want to share the best, most interesting parts of Gabe's story with all of you. Just like in my last video, I'm going to do my best to cover it from start to finish. And by the way, let me know your recommendations for other devs that I should cover in the future down below. There were a lot of great suggestions on the last video, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. There were also a lot of suggestions for what the title of this series should be called, although they varied wildly in quality. Keep it up, fellas. Real proud of you. I might just change the name of it every video. We'll see. Anyway, I'm Verac, and I'd like to welcome you to this game dev documentary. A Veracumentary, if you will, on Gabe Newell. I want to tell you how Gabe got his start, becoming a millionaire before Gordon Freeman was even a twinkle in his eye. I want to tell you about how Doom heavily influenced Gabe and Valve as a whole. And if you stick around to the end, you'll get to hear about the weird things that Gabe has invested his billions into. It ranges from literal science fiction to charity to webcomic patronage. You're gonna want to hear about it. So sit back, relax, get a drink, and enjoy as I spin you the tale of the legendary Gabe Newell. First, a quick message. Thank you to today's sponsor, World of Warships. World of Warships is a highly detailed game with a highly active community that made me realize I am highly bad at boat warfare. You give me a boat, I just want to ram people. It's a terrible strategy, but God, it feels good. See all these guns? I don't need them. They're for you. You come try them out. The game's got new stuff to check out every month, too. It's got more than 40 unique maps with dynamic weather effects, which means you get the real boat experience. It really makes you feel like you're an aircraft carrier about to make a terrible strategic decision. Or you can use a battleship, a destroyer, or a cruiser, or even a submarine if you're into that. Little baby, you wanna go hide underwater? Go on, pick it, I won't tell anybody. If you like action and strategy, you'll enjoy World of Warships. Register for a new account via code BRAVO or click the link in my description, and you'll get 7 days premium account time, 1.5 million credits, and 500 doubloons. Complete 10 battles, and you can even get your choice of one of these cool guys. So click the link below and enjoy. Thank you again to World of Warships. Now, back to the video! Gabe Newell was born on November 2nd, Episode 1, 1962, and came directly out of the womb eating Miracle Whipped Wonder Bread with lunch meat.
Remember when he brought in all the Wonder Bread and lunch meat? It's like revealing your white trash roots, Gabe. No, Miracle Whip is awesome.
Okay, I just had to get all that on my system. Okay, now for real this time. We're good.
Gabe likes Miracle Whip.
Gabe Newell was born in Colorado on November 3rd, 1962. He enjoyed the typical childhood pastimes of biking around town and, according to this photograph, communing with squirrels via his druidic powers. But unlike many other children at the time, he took an early interest in computers. Gabe would attend Davis Senior High School in California, graduating in 1980. He evidently performed quite well in school because he would then go on to become a freshman at one of the country's most prestigious universities, Harvard. Harvard served Gabe adequately well for about 3 years, from 1980 to 1983. No, I'm not doing the 3 thing on purpose, it really was 3 years. Anyway, it's 1983, and the young adult Gaben takes some time off from his studies to visit his brother, who got a job in Seattle, Washington, at this quickly rising tech company called Microsoft. For context, Microsoft had been in business at this point in time for about 8 years with under 300 employees. They weren't the behemoth that they are today, but they were doing well for themselves, making bank on their MS-DOS operating system royalties, with big dreams of expansion. According to InfoWorld around this time, quote, "Some insiders say Microsoft is attempting to be the IBM of the software industry." IBM was the big dog at the time, so to put it in modern parlance, this was a big f***ing deal. There's enough history there for its own video, but for now, all you need to know is this. Microsoft was relatively small, growing fast, very profitable, and filled with talented people for a young Gabe Newell to learn as much as he could from soon enough. But he would have to get there first. So Gabe packed up all the things he needed to go visit his brother. He had no intention of working for Microsoft at that point in time. All he knew was that he wanted to spend time with his brother and see the sights in Seattle. You know, the Space Needle and the homeless people and whatever. Turns out, though, Brother Newell wasn't down to just gallivant around town. Mr. Gates wasn't letting him off the hook that easy. He had to go work. But that wasn't so bad as far as Gabe was concerned. He just figured, well, I'm already here. I want to spend time with my brother. I like computers and don't mind being around a bunch of sweaty nerds all day. Why don't I just hang out with him at work? So that's exactly what he did. Gabe Newell hung out around the Microsoft offices with his brother. Now, I don't know what Gabe was getting up to, but apparently it annoyed the hell out of Steve Ballmer. For those of you who aren't familiar, Steve Ballmer was a big figure at Microsoft, head of sales at the time in 1983, and well known for publicly yelling and sweating a lot.
Developers, 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 developers. Developers, 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 developers.
He would even be CEO of the company later from 2000 to 2014. Here's some clips from my favorite video of him ever made.
How much do you think this advanced operating environment is worth? Wait just 1 minute before you answer. Now we can take this Ferrari. Reversi. No, it's just $99. That's right. It's Windows from Microsoft. Order today. P.O. Box 286 DOS, except in Nebraska.
I never get tired of that video. It's just the way he says everything. This Ferrari, no, it's only $99. Anyway, like I was saying, Gabe hanging around the offices all day was annoying the hell out of Steve Ballmer. It got to the point where Ballmer finally said to him, if you're gonna take up space around here all day, you might as well be productive. Drop out of Harvard right now, Gabe Newell, and get to work on Windows! Okay, he may not have said that last part word for word, but that was basically the idea. And Gabe actually found that idea somewhat appealing. After all, he liked computers, and he was interested in software development, and Harvard wasn't really providing what he was looking for at that point. So Gabe would hang around their offices for another 3 months, this time while trying to be productive, trying to learn and be useful. Gabe would go on to describe those 3 months as being an extremely educational experience for him, more than his university could provide. Not to bang on Harvard, but I learned more in 3 months with those guys at Microsoft than I did the entire time I was at Harvard. At Harvard, I learned how to drink beer while doing a headstand in the snow, which, you know, is a useful skill, but not nearly as useful as how to actually develop software.
At Harvard, I learned how to drink beer while doing a headstand in the snow. So, which, you know, it's a useful skill, but not nearly as useful as how to actually develop software.
So Gabe soaked up all the knowledge he could from the likes of Tom Corbett, Neil Konzen, and Steve Wood, describing it as the most intense and valuable educational experience I've ever had. And apparently, after those 3 months, Ballmer's words must have rang true to Gabe. He was convinced. He said, "Screw it, I'm dropping out," and was officially given a job at Microsoft, becoming their 271st employee. You might be thinking that's a bit of a bold decision, dropping out of one of the most prestigious universities after 3 years there, but it also fit the theme for that particular company. After all, Microsoft was founded by a couple of college dropouts, Bill Gates specifically being a Harvard dropout himself. Granted, Bill dropped out only after a few months, and Gabe did after investing several years, but obviously I think it worked out alright for him considering he's a multi-billionaire now. Remember though, kids, stay in school, because dropping out is not typically a pipeline to fame and fortune. That is, of course, unless you're Gabe Newell, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Steven Spielberg, Oprah Winfrey, Mark Zuckerberg, Michael Dell, Steve Wozniak, Brad Pitt, Lady Gaga, Eddie Murphy, Sean Diddy Code. No, wait, fuck, go back. Anyway, despite the strange way he entered into the company, Gabe would prove a highly valuable member of the team. He held a variety of roles and worked on many different projects during his time at Microsoft, including working on their brand spanking new Windows operating system. Look, it has a graphical user interface. It uses this new little thing called a mouse. Nobody likes the mouse, it's stupid, and it'll probably never catch on, but it's cute. They even hid an Easter egg in the code. It was encrypted and hidden within a bitmap file, so it wasn't discovered until very recently. Credit to Lucas Brooks on Twitter for finding it. Check it out. It's a list of the people who worked on Windows 1.0. And there's Gaben. Gabe was an extremely hard worker at Microsoft. He even earned the nickname Madman Newell at one point, due to him bringing a sleeping bag to work so that he could code around the clock for an entire month. With all this work, Gabe would be involved with the first couple releases of Windows, and hold various positions on different projects at the company from 1983 to 1996. It was 13 long and lucrative years for Gaben, for everyone at Microsoft, and when I say lucrative, I mean loads of money. I'm talking your coworkers are deciding on a whim to buy a farm or a bowling alley, or they're showing up in a new sports car to work. Let me tell you a little bit about the Microsoft Millionaires. Jump back in time for a second, it's 1986. Gabe's been working for Microsoft for 3 years now, and the company is making the big decision to go public. This means Microsoft stocks are now up for grabs. What this also means is that Bill Gates can give stock options to his employees as compensation for all the extreme overtime they've been cramming in. Employees like Madman Newell. What would happen next was described by many Microsoft employees as akin to winning the lottery, because the stock saw a sharp increase the very day that it went public, but that was nothing compared to what it would do for those who were patient. Over the next 10 years, Microsoft stock would grow in value nearly 100 times over. It's estimated that Microsoft created approximately 10,000 millionaires by the year 2000 because of this. Not everyone who got stock options sold them at the same time, of course, so obviously some made more than others depending on their luck and their patience. But those who cashed out big were going nuts with it. They were buying sports leagues and restaurants, because that's what you do when you're a programming nerd that suddenly has more money than you know what to do with. Others decided to get into philanthropy or activism. And of course, there were those that tried to start their own companies, with varying levels of success, ranging from sweet, I achieved my dream, now I have even more money, to please Mr. Gates, can I have my job back? It's not known exactly how much Gabe made from all of this, but we know he did well. Well enough that he could take the risk of funding and building a dream someday if he wanted to. Now, he just needed the dream. So, what would it take to sow the seeds of inspiration for Gabe Newell? How about a game where you rip apart demons in hell with a chainsaw? How about playing it at 2 in the morning and getting scared shitless by a cacodemon? Enter Doom! The original one, from 1993, made by id Software. Doom was the inspirational push that got Gabe thinking, wow, you can do this with video games? You can make people react, make them have fun, even make them feel scared? Soon, Gabe would be bringing Doom into the Microsoft offices on a laptop, showing it off to anyone that he could, saying, look what PC games can do. This is a lot better than your NES system or your Sega system. Turns out, he wasn't the only one excited about it. 2 things would happen after that. 1, Microsoft wanted a Windows port of Doom. Most people, if they were playing PC games at the time, were playing them on on DOS and not Windows. Microsoft was looking to change that. So, according to several interviews with Gabe, he called up John Carmack at id Software to make them an offer. I'm going to paraphrase Gabe's recollection of how that phone call went and just embellish it a little bit. Hey, Johnny! Johnny C! Gabe said calmly. I know you hate Microsoft and you think we're stuffy and all that, but listen, I'm built different. What if we made a port of Doom for you for free? You get to sell it and keep all the profits, and we get to prove that Windows can run video games. John Carmack heard all of that and then said, "Death to Microsoft!" But yeah, okay, alright, and gave them the source code. Long story short, bada bing, bada boom, Gabe leads Win Doom, and it's shown off at the Computer Game Development Conference in 1994, where everybody goes, "Games on Windows? Hwah!" It was through this porting project that Gabe would get to know some of the people at id Software, an important connection for his future career. More on that in a bit. Because back to my two things that happened, thing number 2. Microsoft commissions a study around 1995, around the same time as the Doom Windows porting project is going on, because they wanted to find out, are our sales numbers as good as we think they are? Are people adapting to our Windows software when they buy a computer it comes packaged with, or are they uninstalling Windows the moment after unboxing their PC? Well, the results were a bit surprising for Microsoft. The good news for them was that people really were adopting Windows. According to the study that they commissioned, Windows was at the number 2 spot for all software downloaded to people's computers. You may say, number 2? Well, yeah, but number 2 out of all software possible is still pretty good. That was a good sign. However, the bad news was that number 1 spot, it wasn't a different Microsoft product, and it wasn't Apple, and it wasn't IBM or some other big software giant. The most popular thing found on people's computers in 1995 was porn and video games.
Well, it turns out they're using them for porn and video games.
Now look, I don't know what people were spanking it to specifically, but I can tell you the video game. And hopefully the video game was not also the subject of the spanking. You never know. You could take a wild guess what it was, though. The video game was Doom, baby! The results of this study lit a fire under Microsoft to really get that port completed. Teams shifted around and Microsoft would eventually release a Windows port. Doom 95 with DirectX by way of Alex St. John. The study also lit a fire specifically under Bill Gates, who once ran the idea by Alex St. John of buying out id Software entirely. Because that's what you do when you have that kind of money. These people are annoying me. Maybe I should purchase them. Of course, the guys at id Software would never allow Microsoft to buy them. Now, ZeniMax Media buying them in 2009, that's fine. Then Microsoft would buy ZeniMax 10 years later. Welcome to Xbox, boys. Story for another time. Anyway, back to Gabe and Doom. The results of this study were shocking. And where Bill Gates would consider simply buying out id Software, Gabe Newell was more interested in learning from them.
So somehow, the largest software company in the world was being out-distributed by a 12-person company in Mesquite, Texas. And there was no conception, there was no model for why this made any sense. How could they possibly have done that, right?
He needed to learn more. What was happening here? Well, he learned for one thing that id did not require a huge sales team like Microsoft was so concerned about. They relied on a vastly different method of selling their product. One that Gabe preferred over his own companies, a method that was much more direct. What the guys at id decided on was that they would sell the game directly to the customer. They only bought one ad for the game, figuring the mainstream press wasn't interested in them anyway. They focused instead on leveraging something called shareware, which in 1995 was basically the fancy word for a demo. They'd go to stores with their shareware version of Doom, which only had the first episode levels on it, and they would say, "You sell this to people for literally any price you want, we don't care." Because what they were relying on was that people would play the shareware version and want to play the full game after they were done. And if they wanted the full game, they'd need to buy it directly from id Software, straight from developer to customer. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? This directness from developer to customer is something that obviously inspired Gabe. This was the polar opposite of Microsoft's model. Microsoft's model was all about dealing with resellers, middlemen, people who would come to Microsoft, literally buy a pallet full of Microsoft products and say, thanks for selling it to me, now I'm gonna sell this to other stores that will sell it to other people. An indirect model of developer to reseller to store to customer, a model that almost couldn't be more indirect if it tried. And it was getting worse, because at the same time that Doom was enjoying its insane popularity with its more direct model, Gabe recalls that arguments were being had at Microsoft about how to better do sales. Not to make them more direct, though. The arguments being had, according to Gabe, at Microsoft at the time were not about if they should work with resellers or not, but with how big of a sales team they needed to work with resellers. Perhaps a 500-person sales team to work with resellers. Point being, Gabe did not like how disconnected Microsoft was becoming from their customers. And at this point, he was doubting whether he'd stay at Microsoft for much longer. This was about the time Microsoft was making the transition from cool, agile software company that was whipping IBM's butt to evil empire status. So working on games kept sounding more and more attractive. Gabe was ready. He had ideas about how he could do things better, but you can't do these things alone. It would take a couple talented fellow Microsoft employees to help him make the final push. Enter the Twin Michaels! Specifically, Mike Harrington and Michael Abrash. Mike Harrington, like Gabe, was also starting to get tired of Microsoft and was lucky enough to have stock options to fund his exit. But where Mike saw his peers blowing their stock option wads on retirement with a sports league or a farm, he wanted something else. He wanted to make games. So Mike asked around Microsoft's offices to see if anyone else was down for leaving and starting a game studio. But most people he spoke to, unfortunately, weren't interested. That is, except for Gabe Newell. Apparently, they meshed together quite well, and quite quickly, because the story of how they partnered up is short. It happened like this, right? And I'm only slightly embellishing here. Gabe is eating lunch, scratching his chin, thinking, 3D action game. Mike sits down next to him, says, "Video game?" And Gabe says, "Yes!" And thus the future Valve co-founders became a team. They needed one more connection to make things work, though. This is where the other Michael would come into play. Michael Abrash, a talented man, friend to Gabe and Mike, programming hero of John Carmack, and fellow Microsoft employee. That is, until he left Microsoft, much to the chagrin of Bill Gates, to go work at id Software. According to Gabe, Abrash kept telling Mike Harrington and I how cool working on games was. Gabe and Mike were periodically getting hit up by Abrash just so that he could say, "Hey, you guys should stop working at Microsoft and start a games company." And they took him up on it. They didn't really need much more encouragement than that. Abrash loved telling them specifically about the new and tasty game engine that he was working on, called the Quake engine. Abrash was highly confident in his work on this engine, going as far as saying that Quake will be the worst game done on the Quake engine. And he liked Quake. That's just the level of potential Abrash felt that the engine had. So much so that he suggested Gabe and Mike license the engine for their own uses. You guys want to make a video game? I think this is the best engine for the job. Come to id Software and get it. Evidently, they agreed, because they'd soon hit the road to go visit id's studio in Texas. The goal of this visit was twofold: to get the Quake engine licensed for their potential first video game, of course, but also to learn some tips about what the hell they were even doing in making a video game. The future Valve boys knew that they wanted to make a 3D action game, and they were both veterans of the software industry, but just because you're a computer engineer doesn't mean that you actually know how to make a compelling video game. They needed to learn from the best, and at the time, who better to ask than the guys who made the #1 software beating Windows? Only problem, id Software did not particularly like Microsoft. They'd take a deal where their game gets ported for free and they get to keep all the profit. Sure, who wouldn't? They'd poach Microsoft's programmers if they really respected the individual, like Michael Abrash. Sure. But they weren't keen on a couple of Microsoft guys taking their game engine to go make something with it. id basically considered themselves the total opposite of Microsoft philosophically. It's 1996, Microsoft is a software giant eating up the entire market, and we're id Software. We're the rebels, the guys sticking it to the man with our subversive, gory video games. It would take mediator Michael Abrash to make the meeting work. As an ex-Microsoft employee himself, he was willing to vouch in favor of Gabe and Mike, and the guys at id apparently listened. So after Abrash succeeded that persuasion check, the future Valve boys would make their way to id's Texas studio. Apparently, the arrival of Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington was met with brutal unenthusiasm from the id Software team. That is, from everyone except for their one friend, Michael Abrash, who remembers the event like this. Quote, "I don't recall that when they came down to id there was a lot of great chemistry. Let's put it this way. It wasn't like when 9 Inch Nails came to visit. That was a cool thing. These were the guys that worked on stuff like Microsoft Bob and home automation. You're not going to walk into the coolest game company on the face of the earth and have the guys say, 'Wow, nice to hang out with you.'" Abrash recalls that he was essentially the only one at id Software who had any optimism in what Gabe and Mike were going to do with the Quake engine. But the future Valve co-founders were able to put that tension aside and get what they needed. They spoke with John Romero, got some vital tips about how to start a game development company, left with the source code to Quake on a CD before they even officially licensed the engine thanks to Abrash, and they left with a mission to make their own original video game. They were ready to prove that their success wasn't just piggybacking off of Microsoft or anybody else, that they could build something themselves from the ground up. So they quit their safe, stable corporate jobs, and that year, August 24th of 1996, on the same day that Gabe gets married, because we have to make all of our huge life changes at the same time, Gabe and Mike would officially co-found their new game development company together. They threw some different names around for it at first. They wanted something weird, because every 3D action shooter of the time had sort of a meathead vibe going on. Not that that doesn't have its place, they both liked Doom, but they wanted their company name to stand out in that crowd. Initially, they thought they might call their company Hollowbox, but of course, they would settle on the name that everyone knows them as today. Now they just needed to make a game. Valve's first game would be called Half-Life. But before it would be called Half-Life, it would be called Quiver. And before it would be called Quiver, it was called, "Oh shit, we don't have anybody who knows how to make video games. Get on the phone and call everybody at Microsoft." So the boys did a lot of elevator pitching to their former co-workers. "Hey, we're making a game. We're stepping out on our own. This will be an amazing opportunity. You guys want in?" And they received mild success in doing this.
Some of the people that we thought were going to join us at the beginning didn't. You know, we were like, "Let's go, let's storm the castle," and then there's like, "Where'd everybody go?"
But hey, some success is better than none. It wasn't as many people joining as they had hoped, but they did manage to convince a few other people at Microsoft to come with them. Gabe, Mike, and these new ex-Microsoft pals all had useful computer knowledge of some sort, but just because you know how to code doesn't mean that you know how to make a good level or create a good monster for your game. Fortunately, they were able to round out their team with some hires from other game companies, like Harry E. Teasley, artist and designer at Shiny Entertainment, or Chuck Jones, artist who had just recently worked on Duke Nukem 3D at 3D Realms. Fun fact, this artist would also later work on Kingdom Hearts 3.
Yeah, piece of cake.
Okay, now they had some experienced gaming knowledge in-house. Good, but not quite enough to make a full team. This is when Gabe remembered to reach into his back pocket for the list of tips that John Romero gave him. The only thing written on the piece of paper said, Always put a giant, fully modeled insert of your own head into your video game. People love it, it works every time. And Gabe said, no, wait, hold on, this is the wrong one. And then he pulled out the other piece of paper that John Romero gave him. This piece of paper had a list of names on it. These were the names of people that were making waves in the Quake modding scene. People that were talented and creative, but would never normally be sought after by most major software companies at the time. Mostly, they were just young guys who were dicking around with video games in their free time and had no idea that they were about to receive an email from a millionaire in Seattle offering them a job. Location? Florida. Steve Bond and John Guthrie are making Quake mods and managing a fan site called Quake Command in their spare time. That is, when they're not delivering pizzas, going to classes, or parrying chairs as the manager of the local Waffle House.
The creature designer for most of the AI for the creatures in the game was a manager at a Waffle House.
One day, they receive a sketchy-looking email from some guy named Gabe Newell. Now, I want you to just put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're a young guy, you're going to college, you're working, you're making mods for your favorite game when you can, and then you randomly get an email that says, "Hey dude, me and some other millionaires are going to make Quake, but better. Do you want a job doing that? Call me." Obviously, Steve and John assumed this was a scam, so they ignored it. That is, until curiosity got the better of Steve in particular, who I'm sure was dreaming about what it would be like to not work at a Waffle House, so he finally decided to call the number. According to John Guthrie, that day, Gabe bought Steve a plane ticket, a rental car, and a hotel room. Steve was standing at the airport, waiting for the electronic ticket to come through, and he kept saying, "This has got to be a joke." Of course, as we know now, it wasn't a joke, and Steve was given a few days in Seattle to hang out and make the decision whether or not he wanted to join the Valve team. He said yes, and ended up staying in Seattle. Now, John, back in Florida, was realizing that Steve didn't actually get trafficked by the Nigerian Prince of Seattle, so he followed soon after on this opportunity too. The team that made Half-Life is full of stories like this because they were looking to hire anyone that they could that they felt had talent worth paying for. So now they had everything they needed to get started. That is, except someone who would sell their game. A publisher. Evidently, although Gabe would be inspired by Doom's directness to the customer when he helped create Steam, he didn't consider it a viable option for Valve at the time to self-publish Half-Life. I think it's worth pointing out that neither did id Software consider it a viable model after they published Doom, considering that they also grabbed a publisher so that they could get Doom 2 and Quake in stores those following years. Either way, they wanted a publisher, but no publisher wanted Valve. At first, they couldn't find anybody who would ship a game with them, despite Gabe and Mike's Microsoft veteran credentials. It was sort of weird going from Microsoft, where you were really respected, to going into a meeting with a game publisher who said, "Go away, stop bugging me, come back with credibility." According to Gabe, in one particularly bad meeting, Valve suggested that they would use a skeletal animation system for the characters in their game. Apparently, this idea was so far-fetched to the publisher that he immediately ended the presentation they were giving. The publisher said, "Okay, meeting's over." They didn't believe we could do it. Fortunately, they did finally secure one interested publisher in the company, Sierra, later called Sierra Studios. The head of that publisher at the time, Scott Lynch, recalls that the big question about Valve's potential game was this: is this just going to be new Quake levels? The Valve team assured them, no, it wasn't. This was going to be a game with its own unique story to tell and world to explore. This was no Quake expansion pack. With that reassurance, Sierra was all in. They made the agreement to be Valve's publisher for one game. And with that, it was time for Valve to get to work. And work they did. Mike Harrington would come to be known as the practical realist, as he was responsible for much of Half-Life's programming, whereas Gabe Newell would be described as the ambitious dreamer, as he was responsible for some of the key philosophies behind the game's design. As Ken Birdwell said in Valve's Half-Life documentary,
Gabe's dictate was, as you walked forward, something needs to happen like every 3 to 5 seconds. The player stands still, the
Didn't have to be much.
universe can be quiet. But if they move forward, if they're active, the universe needs to play back something, needs to do something, even if it is a scripted sequence or
even just an interesting sign or
a sound or some vignette or something.
Basically, Gabe wanted a game where the player was constantly bumping into interesting things to experience. Every little vignette in the game was trying to tell you something about the area you're in and how the story is proceeding.
For God's sake, open the silo door! They're coming for us! It's our only way out! Oh my God, we're doomed!
Another one of Gabe's contributions was enforcing the idea that the game should be reactive to the player.
My God, what are you doing?
Stop fucking with the microwave!
It was of prime importance to him that the game environment acknowledge the player's actions. If you shoot at the wall, it should make a mark on the wall. If you shoot at some soldiers, they should either shoot back or run away. We take this kind of thing for granted today, but Half-Life was one of the first action shooters to really kind of give a shit about this concept. And the fancy key word for this concept here is reinforcement. You do a thing, the environment rewards you by acknowledging your existence. Reinforcement was the key idea for Half-Life's development, and this was in opposition to those who were clamoring for the game to be more realistic. After all, smacking a crowbar on the wall shouldn't necessarily make a bullet hole, but you obviously want to smack the wall when you see it makes a mark on there so that you can start drawing stuff on the wall and making marks all over the fucking place. Here's what Gabe had to say about it.
And you'd have these conversations where you'd be sitting in a design review and somebody'd say, that's not realistic. And you're like, okay, what does that have to, like, explain to me why that's interesting, because in the real world, I have to write up lists of stuff I have to go to the grocery store to buy. And I have never thought to myself that realism is fun. I go play games to have fun.
True and real. Behold, reinforcement! Gabe would have a few more influences on Half-Life through his interests at the time. When the game was in very early draft stages, he knew that he wanted it to have a horror element, something to scare the player like how he felt when he was playing Doom late at night. Gabe had been recently reading Stephen King's The Mist around then, and that book has a sense of tension that he wanted to emulate. You know, the kind of vibe where monsters are always hiding in the mist. Or, in Half-Life's case, monsters that would be always hiding around the next corner, down the hallway, or in the vents, ready to jump at you. Another inspiration that influenced the game involved the G-Man, who was based on Gabe Newell's interest at the time in the cigarette-smoking man from the X-Files. Some of Gabe's personal life influenced the game as well. If you've never seen the final boss of Half-Life, here it is! It's called the Nihilinth, and it looks like a giant creepy baby monster. There's a reason for that. I'll let Gabe's son explain.
The final boss of Half-Life 1, actually, the giant evil baby monster, is supposed to be me. When my mother was in childbirth, they were thinking, what's something really scary? And at the time, having a child seemed to be the most scary thing to everyone.
By this point, Half-Life had been in development for months, almost a year. Everyone was working away trying to make the best game that they could. There were plenty of good ideas being brought to life, but there was one huge problem. All the work being done did not have a coherent vision. One guy is making one level, this guy is making another level. Do they connect? Do they make sense when they're put back to back? The guys are beginning to realize, no, they don't. Oh shit, we're making a game that's supposed to have a cool narrative setting it apart from its competitors, and we don't have a coherent narrative. So, to assess the full damage, after months and months of work, they all sat down together in the same room for the first time to evaluate everything that they had made and realized none of it meshed. It wasn't fun.
You must have been in the meeting when we reviewed all the levels. It was like the first time everybody piled into a room.
Right.
And Gabe had his crazy Hellraiser chair with the beautiful Mac monitor. And we played, for 2 days, he played everyone's levels. But I remember one moment, he turned around, he was like this with his hair, he's going, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail. And I was just like, It blew me away. I was like, oh shit, this isn't good.
Valve had a holiday deadline coming up and just realized that their game sucked. They had an important decision to make. Do we ship the game as it is, or do we keep working on it? We should probably ship the game. After all, Sierra has already arranged for promotions and advertisements. They're expecting this to be their biggest game of the year, and delaying it could seriously damage the relationship between us. They're practically the only publisher that would say yes to us, so do we really want to do that? On top of that, the game has already been shown off at E3 to huge public excitement. That excitement comes with the expectation that it's coming out this year, the year we said it would come out, but the game isn't good. What do we do? It was a hard decision, but they ultimately decided to delay the game and keep working on it, even if it ended in a PR disaster. They basically told Sierra, hey, our game sucks, we're gonna make it good, and we know you're not gonna pay us for working on it further. After all, they had the good fortune of being led by men who could literally afford a bit of extra development time, as well as having the wisdom to decide to give it that time. Because, as Gabe figured, even if he had to pay out of pocket to keep the game in development,
late is just for a little while, suck is forever.
Which of course is a callback to the famous Shigeru Miyamoto quote, a bad game is forever. A delayed game is also bad. I hate video games. What did I say? Huh, bitch? But even Microsoft money only lasts so long, especially when you're paying the full-time salaries of roughly 30 people. Valve would now try to get the game entirely redeveloped, have all the levels feel cohesive, and do it as quickly as possible. They set a goal for the spring of 1998. When spring of 1998 came and left and the game still wasn't done yet, it was pushed to summer of 1998. Then fall of 1998. Delay. Some things never change with Valve, but it wasn't for no reason. After all, the game was being almost entirely remade from the ground up. That first year was like the test run for them on how to make a game. This time, this second year, every level would gel with one another. It would all flow as a story, and it would be overall way more fun. That was the goal. And, as many of you know, delaying the game worked. It worked really well. Half-Life would release in late 1998 to widespread critical and popular acclaim. Valve, despite their rocky and uncertain start, had knocked it out of the park on their very first release. They celebrated by smashing a headcrab piñata with a crowbar and then taking everyone and their families on a vacation to Mexico. Alright guys, I gotta be real with you for a bit. I am really disappointed in where this story goes from a narrative perspective, because I like looking into game developers for the work that they do on their games. And it turns out Gabe pretty much stops being a game developer, like, within this exact time period on. You know, just for most of Valve's history, that's all. After Half-Life 1 and 2, in fact, during Half-Life 2, I start seeing a lot less Gabe does something relating to Valve's video games, and a lot more Gabe hires a team that pitches him on an idea to do something. And I'll be happy to be proven wrong, but as far as I can tell, Gabe is never as involved with the game design as he was during Half-Life 1 ever again. So where do we go from here? Well, let me back up what I'm saying first so that you know I'm not just blowing smoke, and then we'll cover some more concrete information to end out the video. During Half-Life 2, Gabe intentionally backs off of the game's development, just a couple years into it, letting his team at Valve take the lead. His reasoning for this was that he wanted to be able to judge the team's work with fresh eyes, seeing it as their audience would see it. He came up with the idea to have Dr. Breen as the antagonist, and there was the incident with the German hacker, but other than that, Gabe steps away to go work on Steam. Steam comes out, a year later Half-Life 2 comes out on Steam, and then we enter an era where Gabe, like I said, is just hiring people to do a thing rather than doing a thing. Is he involved with these projects? Probably. To what extent? I don't know. The way Valve does the credits for their games doesn't help. Just completely f***ing void of any useful information. Throw everybody into a giant f***off list. And then we get to Portal 2. We know for a fact that Gabe was not involved very much with the development of Portal 2. You would know that if you were just looking at Valve's credits for the game, but I digress. He said it himself several times.
Half-Life 1 or Half-Life 2?
Portal 2. I worked less on Portal 2 than I. So if there's this problem that when you work on games, and it's a collection of flaws and regrets and mistakes.
Under a deadline.
Under a deadline. So Portal 2, which I worked on less, it's like much easier for me to appreciate as, oh wow, that's pretty good. Good job, guys.
Also happens to be a great game unto its own right, conveniently.
The reason why he didn't have much to do with it, well, the lead designer of Portal 2 explains it like this.
I think he always wanted to be part of the team, but being Gabe and being in his position, that never really worked, I feel, because people would be like, whatever you say. And I think he was more like, no, I want to like be part of the team and come up with ideas. And that was really hard for people. So I think there was a period where he kind of stepped back and was like, all right, I guess I'm just not going to be able to interact with everyone that way.
So it's actually really sad, because even if Gabe wanted to jump feet first back into game development, he might not be able to fit in just because of his status of being Gabe Newell. And it's not like his status has decreased over time. So if that happened all the way back with Portal 2, I have to speculate and say I don't see why it would change for any future Valve game. To those of you commenting right now, just email him and ask. I did. A few different times. I never got a reply, and frankly, I didn't expect to. The man gets 1 billion emails a day, so I don't blame him. Although, I did find screenshots of people who got replies if they were in the hospital or wanted a deadlock code. Wait a minute, hold on. Gabe, if you're watching this, I would still love to know what your other contributions to other Valve games were. And by the way, I'm in the hospital and I just really want to play Deadlock. I want to end the video on something a little different. Gabe is a very wealthy man due to that little money printer of his, so I thought it would be interesting to talk about where all that money goes. You gotta get some shit for number one first, of course. You buy a yacht, a giant knife collection, a Porsche.
See you at the tournament.
Thank you.
A manservant that brings you your potato phone.
Gary, bring me the potato phone.
But he's also invested into charities, nonprofits, and research. For example, we'll start with Starfish. In 2024, he co-founded the company Starfish, which is researching the capabilities of neural interfacing, i.e. using your brain to interact with computers. This could be for entertainment purposes, for video games, among other things. Who knows what the possibilities are? You could say that Starfish was made just to be competitive with Elon Musk's Neuralink, but in my research for this video, I've found Gabe talking about neural interfacing as early as 2013. So he's obviously been thinking about this stuff for a long time.
And I think we're looking at really science fiction-y stuff happening sooner than people expect, in the sense that we're going to be able to drive your nervous system and read out of your nervous system sooner than people expect, and it'll be a consumer-grade technology sooner than people expect.
We've just recently seen that this technology can help disabled people greatly, which is amazing. There's also, of course, the possibility that this technology ends up creating some sort of cyberpunk dystopia or utopia. You take your pick. I imagine we'll see the outcome of all this within the next 10 years, or maybe as early as, oh, I don't know, tomorrow. Who knows? Good luck, everybody.
The real world will stop being the metric that we apply to the best possible visual fidelity, and instead it's like the real world will seem flat, colorless, blurry, compared to the experiences that you'll be able to create in people's brains.
Moving along from Starfish, Gabe is also the founder of an ocean research organization called Inkfish. Yes, apparently Gabe is big into ocean life. Inkfish calls themselves a philanthropic fundraising service. They collaborate with academics from all over the world to explore the depths, using well-designed submarines that can touch down to the literal bottom of the ocean. You know, the one place on our planet that we understand less than space. And I, for one, find it very refreshing in a world where other billionaires make rickety joyrides out of submarines that horrifically kill people, to hear about a billionaire spending his money in a way that safely helps broaden our understanding of the ocean. So bravo, Gabe. Much more mundanely, Gabe is a longtime reader and supporter of the webcomic Questionable Content, at least as recently as 2020. I haven't read the webcomic myself, so I have no comment about its quality, but I do find it very funny that of all the major investments he's made, he also happens to give this one particular webcomic a few bucks a month on Patreon. He was even featured in the comic in 2007 after meeting the creator of the comic at SakuraCon and asking for a signed poster from him. In a very strange turn of events, Gabe is also the, quote, fairy godfather to a cooking website. This all happened when he bid on an auction at his son's middle school, buying an item that happened to be a personal dinner for 10. The two guys offering the dinner went over to the Newell household, and apparently their cooking blew everybody away. Gabe called it, quote, easily the best food I've ever had. So these two guys, Chris Yun and Grant Crilly, would later form a company together called Chef Steps. And according to them, Gabe offered them help in the form of a low-interest loan. He was just so impressed with their cuisine that he thought they deserved some generous offer of funding. And lastly, I want to mention a couple of the most famous examples of Gabe's charity work. Gabe is the co-founder of a motorsports racing team called The Heart of Racing, which has supported donations to the Seattle Children's Hospital since 2014. In 2020, he made a significant donation to a different children's hospital, this one in New Zealand, called Starship. This donation was related to a partnership he made with Rocket Lab to send a gnome into space. It sounds silly because it is, but it was also a great way to draw out publicity for a good cause. For those who don't know, Half-Life 2 Episode 2 had an achievement for players who took this little gnome guy all the way to the end of the game and launched him off in a rocket. The achievement's called Little Rocket Man. He's in Left 4 Dead 2 as well, by the way. Well, Gabe was able to leverage this meme into some good for kids who need it, and offered to donate $1 per every live viewer of the launch on their website. The launch was a success, and it ultimately resulted in Gabe donating about $200,000 to the Starship Children's Hospital. Gabe Newell is an interesting guy. He's less of a game developer than I initially hoped, and more of a producer. And yet, if he weren't in that producer role, I think the world would be worse off. God forbid if any other major company was running Steam. For Steam's generally consumer-positive existence alone, I hope that Gabe sticks around for a long, long time. Maybe with his neural research, we'll get a permanent God Emperor Gabe on the Golden Throne someday. Hope there are no negative side effects to that. Gabe isn't perfect, and neither is Valve, but I still like both of them. It's hard not to. I personally hope Valve stops releasing Dota and Dota byproducts, and I hope that Gabe continues to oversee the company and keep it running smoothly, Steam included. I also hope that his research has positive effects on the world, and that he continues to put his money into charities as well. I hope you enjoyed the video, and maybe learned something along the way. You can tell me about it in the comments below. Or if you had this on in the background while you were doing the dishes and zoning out, or drawing, or whatever, thanks for letting my voice invade your subconscious. Since you weren't paying attention, I've implanted several code words that are going to activate you like a sleeper agent, and now you have no idea which words they are or what. Those are the breaks, sorry baby, you got clean dishes and completed your art project, but at the cost of your brain. The people who watched this intently while eating lunch, they know what's up. They're gonna avoid those code words. You better go back and watch the whole video again to avoid all that. Genuinely though, if you made it all the way to the end here, thank you very much for watching. And double thank you to all of my patrons who helped me decide who this video was going to be about. Very grateful for your continued support. And with all that taken care of, I'm going to play some funny Half-Life 1 clips I got while recording footage for the game. Bye-bye!
They're waiting for you, Gordon, in the test chamber.
Fine. It won't even know I'm here. I seem to be wounded, but I can keep going. I'm with the science team. I'll stay here.
When you do find the rocket, you'll have to get up to the control room and launch it yourself. He said something about a Lambda team needing the satellite in orbit if they were ever going to clean up this mess.
With my
make an excellent team.